So we know how to map path names to route names in our router, and we know how to link to other pages using route names, not the paths, like you see here. But how would we print out dynamic data inside of our template? For example, if we wanted to print out the number of products doing something like this, how do we set the products count property so it gets rendered out to the page? This is where Ember controllers come in. A controller is where a template is going to look to find the value of a property. It's also how you're going to decorate your applications for the template, and it also contains information that is not stored on the server. We're going to represent it as a branch because a branch has leaves. Get it? Back in our chart, the controller goes about here. And remember, it provides the properties for the templates. Well, it does a lot more than that, but that's how we're going to be using it in this section. So here we are back in our index template. And inside of that, we have a products count property. When this template gets rendered, the first thing that happens is that it looks for a controller called index controller and then checks to see if that index controller has a property inside of it called products count. So the first step is to create this. We need to create this controller. So here you can see we create an index controller, namespacing it with our Ember application, and we define it like so. Then inside of it, we declare a products count property, which has a value of 6. This code properly renders out, there are 6 products to the screen. Now, there's no coincidence here that we have an index template and an index controller. These both are referenced by the index route. Because we're doing the index route, it's rendering that template, and because we're doing the index route, it's going to go looking for the index controller. It turns out in Ember, every route has a default controller. Remember our about route? Well, we didn't have to define a controller there. That's because Ember automatically created one for us behind the scenes. It looks a little bit like this. But we don't need to write that code. We only need to write that out if we need to define properties inside of the controller, which we don't, so we don't need to have it. If we open this up in our browser and inspect the code, we're going to see something like this. Our value, you can see here, is wrapped in a script tag with an ID of metamorph. What is that metamorph? It sounds like something out of X-Men. Is it going to morph into something? I don't know. Well, it turns out that Ember uses this sort of script tag metamorph to keep tabs on properties in your templates in case it needs to update them later. There's another term for this. It's called binding. It's binding the properties. Let's add another property to our controller, this time specifying a logo to render to our page. Now, you would think you might be able to just print it out to the screen like we did our other property, just wrapping it in curly braces. Well, it turns out that's not going to work. And if we look inside the source, we can see there's the image, and right after source equals quote, it actually inserted that script tag and screwed up our entire page. Let's look at that. This rendered to that, which obviously is not the right thing. If we have properties that are attributes, we need to bind them differently. In this case, we're going to use the bind attributes helper specifying source equals logo. Logo here is the name of our property. This then properly renders out our image tag with an extra data attribute so Ember can keep track of it. Now if we go back into our inspector, we can see that the image indeed renders out properly. Now what if we wanted to print out the current time in a template? Well, to get the current time on somebody's browser, we would need to call this JavaScript function. But this is more than just a value. We actually need to call a function and return that into this property. To do this, we set time equal to an anonymous function, put the function that needs to be called inside of there, and return the value. There's one more thing we need to do here, though. We need to tell Ember that this is a property it needs to call to get the return value. To do this, it's simple. We simply add the property function to the end. Now if we go back in our code, we can see that the time properly gets printed out. Why don't you go try building some controllers, and I'll see you in a minute. Trust me. Just trust me. And then my thing stopped working.